Good evening, everybody. Closer. I would like to welcome you all to our event. My name is Sana Al-Khayat. I'm a member of Tadhamun. Tadhamun in Arabic word means solidarity. Solidarity is an Iraqi women organization standing by Iraqi women's struggle for equal citizenship, human rights, and gender equality, and against sectarian politics in Iraq. We are holding this evening to throw some light on what's been happening in Iraq. The country has been devastated, and the whole world is silent about it. We just wanted to highlight the main issues about what's happening. Layman in the West, in fact, believes that there is a democracy in Iraq since 2003 invasion. We are a non-profit organization, self-finance. We welcome donation. We have a stall over there with CDs on Iraq, Fallujah, books and T-shirts for sale if people are interested. Thank you for coming.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Iraqis. I'm an assistant professor in human rights at the London School of Economics and Political Science. I'll be chairing the first panel of this event, which consists of two panels. I believe most of you have the biographies of our speakers tonight, so I will not be reading them out loud. It's 6:30 now. We have three speakers on the first panel. Our first speaker will be making a presentation for about half an hour. And I urge you to formulate your questions if you have them, but please save them to the end of the panel, which will be at 8. So we have 10 minutes for Q&A at the end. So without further ado, I would like to present Dr. Ephraim Eluded, who's a psychiatrist and a consultant with the Department of Health. And she'll be making a presentation titled The Psychiatric and Psychological Consequences of War and Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder in Iraq. And I'll be keeping time rather vigilantly, so you have half an hour, and we're very happy to have you here tonight.
Thank you very much. Right. As Aisha said, my name is Dr. Ephraim Eluded. I am a consultant psychiatrist and specialist advisor to the Care Quality Commission here in the UK. I actually graduated from Mosul Medical School and came to Britain in 1980 to specialize in psychiatry. I was trained at reputable hospitals and institutions, including the Institute of Psychiatry and the Royal Bethlehem and the Moseley Hospital. My first consultant job was in 1991 in South Essex, and then in 2000 I moved to North London, and I've been working both for the NHS and in private practice as well as the last 2 years for the Care Quality Commission. Normally a talk like this would take at least an hour, but I've been given only half an hour, so I'll try to stick to time. So I have prepared some slides. The title of my talk, as you can see, is The Psychological and Psychiatric Consequences of War. And I will be talking about the most common condition that follows the trauma of war, and that is the post-traumatic stress disorder. Obviously, the focus tonight will be on Iraq. So, can you all see? Yeah. So, as you all know, Iraq has suffered with so many different wars since 1980. The 1980-88 Iran-Iraq war, then the 1991 Gulf War, and followed by the decade plus sanctions. But it is really, and all these obviously resulted in a lot of devastation and trauma, but it is mainly in the last year, since the US-led invasion and occupation of Iraq, which has had the most severe impact on and deep-seated societal convulsion, descending into a state of collapse, which in my opinion, and I don't want to sound pessimistic, is really beyond repair. So there has been, unfortunately, lack of willingness to engage with the psychological aftermath of the wars. For particularly Iraqi civilians, the focus has been really on the welfare of the soldiers and the veterans, but not much attention has been for the Iraqi civilians. Understanding the psychological impact of war on civilians is also obviously very important, because war doesn't just result in devastation of the infrastructure and everything else, but it causes changes in society, and especially in the relationship with the future. War conditions create memories and wounds that outlive the war themselves. Their images, sounds, and persist in art, economics, politics, and private lives of individuals through multiple generations. They create corrosive memories that take decades to heal and higher rates of physical and mental illness. Also, they create social, psychological conditions, and it is often that most of the attention really is on physical problems and physical disability. But it is after the physical problems have healed that we start to see the psychological injuries. And also, war has catastrophic effects on the health and well-being of nations. Studies have shown that war causes more mortality and disability than any other major disease. We all know that, especially there are, I think, a couple of my colleagues, doctors here in the audience. We know that the killer diseases are mainly the heart problems, the cardiovascular disease, the cerebrovascular disease like stroke and whatever, but death as a result of war outnumber these conditions. And actually death as a result of war is simply the tip of the iceberg. In addition to the physical and mental morbidity, other consequences include economic poverty, social decline, malnutrition, destruction of the physical infrastructure, and this is exactly what has happened in Iraq to a great extent. For example, we used to have one of the best health services in the Middle East. That has been reduced to almost nothing, particularly after the 2003 occupation. Other issues are the widespread human suffering, obviously, which I have already touched on. Population displacement. Can you all hear me? It's better now, yeah. Okay. For example, the recent conflict in Mosul, the liberation of Mosul, forced nearly 1 million people had to flee their homes, leaving behind all their possession and just to run away from the situation. And obviously, as we all know, has left the city in total ruins. I hear of the medical school where we studied, and also the main hospitals, all really non in operation at the moment. Wars also had an important part in psychiatric history. This is important to us, we psychiatrists, because it was after the First and Second World War that people started, what happened, the soldiers involved, they all suffered from what we call shell shock, which is now called post-traumatic stress disorder. So that actually resulted in the development of psychological therapies in those days to treat this condition. So in Iraq since 2003, several studies have reported an alarming rates of mortality disability and displacement. There is one study done in 2011, and I haven't mentioned the authors, reported 4.5 million of Iraqi orphans. 70% of them lost their parents after the 2003 invasion. Obviously, the rest, the 30%, after the 1988 and the Gulf War. Okay, right, so the impact on mental health of the civilian population really is very important, because those are the people who are going to, children, the young adults who are going to be running the country in future. The studies of the general population have shown definite increase in the incidence and prevalence of mental disorders. What is interesting is that women, children, and the elderly and the disabled are more affected. And I think the reason for that is because women obviously generally are more vulnerable. There has been a few people have gone to the country and held interviews of people there. And in one interview, some Iraqi people have said, we are living in a state of constant fear in Iraq because of the succession of so many wars, one after the other. There has been no time to recover. So people are really, they are not sure what's going to happen. When is the next war going to be? What will happen to the country? They don't know. And there has been a whole generation who have grown up knowing nothing but war. If we talk about since 1980, so people in their 30s, they have witnessed nothing but war. So depression, I think I have, yeah. Depression, increased rates of suicide, post-traumatic stress disorder. For example, depression. I remember when I went to Iraq in 2004, I was asked through some relatives and some friends to see some patients. And I saw a lady who was severely depressed. I mean, you know, conditions like that we don't see here because we tend to pick them up much earlier, you know, and treat them. So she was extremely depressed. Some of her children have been killed, the others have fled the country, and she was on her own. And if that lady was here, I would immediately have admitted her to hospital. So severe case of depression. I also, you know, there is also increased rates of suicide, particularly among young men, because there is a high rate of unemployment. They don't know what to do. And I will talk about the rest of it, that they resort to drug and alcohol abuse and what have you. So this is another problem. Post-traumatic stress disorder, which I will be talking about later. Increased violent behavior. Drug and alcohol abuse. This is also quite interesting because I think prior to especially the 2003, we did not see this as a problem in Iraq. But I think after the invasion, I don't know, I think, you know, I don't know how drugs like cocaine and heroin and things like that entered the country. And there is a high rate of drug addiction, and also including cannabis and the likes. Alcohol dependence also has been a problem. Anxiety disorders, and mainly manifesting in physical symptoms. So you see people complaining of chest pain, palpitations or increased heart rate, stomach problems, and they go from one doctor to the other. And I remember again another case I saw, and she has seen some 10 different specialists, and they all told her there is nothing organically wrong with her. So I saw her, and I thought she was anxious and depressed. This was in 2012 when I visited Iraq. So I prescribed some medication for her, and she made a very good recovery. And I think I'm still in contact with that lady. So anxiety disorder could present as psychosomatic problems, as I said, you know, and also including back pain, stomach problems. Insomnia is another issue there. People can't sleep, because I will talk about this later, which I would regard as a symptom of PTSD. constant fear, insecurity, and as I said, pessimism about the future, what is going to happen later. There was one study done by the WHO, and it estimated 30% of people who experience traumatic events will develop serious mental illness. And by that, I mean severe depression and psychosis. Okay. Post-traumatic stress disorder. This is one of the most common conditions that develop after severe trauma. In Arabic, those of you who want to know the term in Arabic, it's called اضطراب ما بعد الصدمة. Yeah. So this condition اضطراب ما بعد الصدمة. So this condition arises if the person is subjected to a severe life-threatening condition, including any traumatic event. For example, here in the UK, I see a lot of people with Ptsd, that is the abbreviation for the condition, following severe car accident, for example, or following a severe traumatic event in their life. It has to be life-threatening. But obviously, natural disasters, war, and other, problems would cause this condition. And it can be either acute or chronic and long-term. Anyway, but it has to follow a severe life-threatening condition, and it's quite common. In the last 20 years, it has become one of the major psychiatric diagnoses. The symptoms of PTSD includes persistent remembering of the event. For example, if you've been involved in a severe life-threatening car accident, you will remember the event, It can come during sleep with nightmares, recurring nightmares, waking you up from sleep, vivid memories of the problem, as I said, reliving of the situation, and flashbacks. Now, flashbacks happen during the day, and if you, for example, you've been subjected to severe traumatic condition, you've lived under bombardments and what have you, if you watch television and you see violent scenes, you will start remembering. Increased arousal, anxiety, sleep disturbance, people can't sleep, and hypervigilance and exaggerated startle response. That means you will feel jumpy with any little noise, you just feel, anxious and jumpy. And I think when I went to Iraq in 2004, that was a year after the 2003 invasion, I witnessed a lot of that. People don't obviously admit or, to it. And that is maybe because still our people in Iraq, they regard, mental health and complaining about psychological symptoms as stigma, and they don't go to see psychiatrists. So people, for example, were quite anxious, and they were, talking all together, and even without talking to them and examining their mental state, I could see that this condition was really quite prevalent there. If this condition is not treated, it then leads to secondary symptoms, including depression, irritability, personality change. And that personality change, aggression and violence, and that is one of the problems if this condition is not treated. Right. Again, the WHO has estimated in one of their studies that 30 to 50% of the population in Iraq are suffering with PTSD symptoms. So, half of the population. Other data is emerging, but it's not very comprehensive. Not many studies have been done by people from the West, for example. And I think the health service in Iraq, as I said, is so, is more or less, it's been really quite affected or more or less destroyed, so people haven't got time to do studies there. Having said that, I came actually across a study that was done in Anbar University. And this study demonstrated that almost 1 in 5 Iraqis, that is 25% of the population, had mental illness at some point, mostly anxiety disorders, depression, and PTSD. 1% of the young adults there reported drug or alcohol dependence. And as I said, the drug and particularly drug dependence was a condition we never saw in Iraq. Where did all these drugs come from? I really don't know. 1.6% of young adults, people in their 20s or 30s, had PTSD symptoms. And as I said earlier, this could be really an underestimation because of the problem of stigma. People don't go, don't complain. Yeah. So how do we diagnose these conditions? In psychiatric terms, we have two classificatory systems here in the West. In this country, we follow the ICD-10, that is the WHO International Classification of Mental and Behavioral Disorders. And in the States, they use the DSM manual, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. And neither of those are, I don't think neither of these are used in Iraq. So, can you see, again, I can't, the title is not appearing on your computer. Why is that? It is big enough. Yeah, so much, I hope I haven't been so pessimistic. So what can we do? Where do we go from here? What can we do to help the situation there? So there is really a need to integrate psychiatric care into post-war plans. As I said, especially as Iraqi healthcare system and infrastructure is severely damaged. And a lot of Iraqi doctors have actually fled the country, have left. In terms of psychiatry, as far as I know, I've been told there is only about 100 psychiatrists in Iraq now, serving a population of 30 million? More than 30 million. So what can they actually do? The other important issue here, we need to think about events of remembering, because this would help in the healing problem, in the healing situation of the population there. Also, health policy should invest in community building. Prior to 1980, we all know that communities in Iraq were so cohesive, so close to each other. This has changed completely. I think the relationships that existed before, and I witnessed that when in my visits to Iraq and to Mosul, don't exist anymore. So we need to be building a relationship within the community themselves. Also, we need to think about reintegration and rehabilitation of displaced people, displaced individuals. I mean, more than 4 million people have been displaced, or even more than that, I think. So they're all going to go back to their homes, to their destroyed homes. So they need special care and help for them to reintegrate. Okay, right. This is what happens when I'm not using my own computer. Also, the population should receive mental health care as part of the total relief, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. Obviously, as I said earlier, the focus has been on physical health. Not much has been paid to psychological or psychiatric health. Psychological support in trying to minimize the effect of war-related trauma, as well as the role of religion and cultural practices. I think this is also quite important, and it can play a positive part in the process of healing. As I said, attention to mental health has been relatively low priority in the midst of all these other issues, all these other pressing issues. Establishment of mental health centers with possibly volunteers from Iraqi psychiatrists abroad, and there are quite a few of us here and in this country and in America. And I know some of my colleagues have gone to Baghdad and have tried to open mental health centers there. I don't know, to be honest, how successful that has been. Obviously, if I talk about medical treatment of psychiatric disorders, we do use medications, like, for example, antidepressants, anxiolytics, mood stabilizers, antipsychotic, psychological treatment, counseling, psychotherapy. How do we treat post-traumatic stress disorder? We treat them with cognitive behavior therapy, that's CBT. And if you want to know the term in Arabic, it's called Al-Ilaj Al-Ma'rafi Al-Suluki. Okay. EMDR, eye movement processing and desensitization. As I said, counseling, psychotherapy, what else? Yeah. I have prepared some slides on, before that, the long-term effects. As I said, these conditions need to be treated. If they are not, they turn into chronic conditions. Sorry, I'm getting confused with the slides. I have prepared some slides on the effects on children, although I think one of my colleagues is going to talk about that.
Yes, and you have 5 minutes.
I have 5 minutes. I'll make it. I thought I will finish before that. So children have always been caught up in warfare. They usually have little choice but to experience the same horrors as their parents. During the last decade, this applies to everywhere around the world, not just in Iraq. Several million children have been killed, 4 to 5 million disabled, 12 million children orphaned and dislocated from their homes. War and terrorism are acts of violence on behalf of adults, and the children have no choice but to be subjected to that. And obviously have had emotionally and psychologically affected generations of children and young people. Children also suffer with PTSD, but the symptoms vary from adults. And again, another study, and I think this was also done by the WHO, the prevalence of PTSD in children is 10 to 90%. And the manifestations are disruptive behavior, anxiety disorders, somatic symptoms, abnormal withdrawal from the world, and hysterical type of behavior. I think just one more. The mental health burden in Iraqi youth, children and young adults. This is another study. Mental illness in children, 40%. PTSD, 14 to 36%. In young adults, 17.2%. And PTSD, 1.6%. So all in all, the number of mentally ill youth in Iraq is estimated 5.7 million. And as I said earlier, number of Iraqi psychiatrists staying in Iraq is around 100. So what can they do to help the situation? And thank you very much.